Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to today's Day Ahead Sufficiency Draft Final Proposal Stakeholder Call. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Today's slide deck presentation is available on the initiative webpage. You can get to that page by going to kaiso.com, and then under the Stakeholder Center tab on the homepage, you'll see Policy Initiatives. If you click that link, it'll take you to our main initiative landing page where you can then search for the initiative webpage. This meeting is being recorded and the video file will be posted to the initiative webpage for information and convenience purposes only. The recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. If you need any technical assistance at any point during the meeting, please send a chat to Inteller Events, the host. To ask questions during the meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right. You can then raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon, or if you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. For everyone joining us today, please state your name and affiliation first before speaking, and you can also send comments and questions via chat to all panelists or myself. Today's agenda will begin with Hillary reviewing initiative objectives and background, followed by Hillary and Danny reviewing processes to help the KAISO BAA meet its day-ahead resource sufficiency evaluation obligations. And afterwards, we'll wrap up for the day. So with that, I will turn it over to Hillary to get us started.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning, coming off of a long weekend. As Christina said, the purpose of today's meeting is to review the processes that the KAISO Balancing Authority area will be putting in place in order to prepare us for meeting the day-ahead resource sufficiency evaluation upon EDAM go live. And so the structure of today's conversation is we're going to first do a little bit of review about how exactly the resource sufficiency evaluation works, and then we'll talk through the specific items that this initiative took upon itself to develop around the RSE and go through those one by one. So the first thing that we're going to do is take a look at how the resource efficiency evaluation is structured. I'll move to the next slide. The day-ahead resource efficiency evaluation is going to be a test that all EDAM participating balancing authority areas will go through every morning to ensure that they have sufficient resources to meet their own obligations prior to engaging in day-ahead transfers with other EDAM BAAs. And so what we're talking about here in this initiative is specifically how that applies to the KAISO Balancing Authority area and the processes that the KAISO Balancing Authority is going to have in place in order to prepare for that. So when we look at how the RSC is structured, it's going to be run every day at 10 a.m. after the market closes prior to the running of the day-ahead market. And fundamentally, it evaluates RSC obligations against RSC eligible supply that has been offered into the day-ahead market across the coming 24 hours. Let's look a little bit more carefully at what is included in each of those categories. On the obligation side, we have the demand forecast, the imbalance reserve requirements, the ancillary services requirements, and high priority exports to non-EDAM balancing authority areas. Then on the eligible supply side, we have all resources located within the KAISO balancing authority area, as well as pseudo-tie resources, unless they have been contracted to a non-EDAM balancing authority area. Excuse me. It also includes forward contracted inter-tie resources and proxy demand resources and voluntarily submitted reliability demand response resources. We'll talk a little bit more about that category specifically later in the presentation. So these are the two categories that are being compared. And then if we look down towards the bottom of the slide, the structure of the RSE is an optimization across the 24 hours of the coming day. In each of those 24 hours, the optimization will compare obligations against supply and see if the optimization can solve without relaxing any of the constraints on the left there. can, then the CAISO BA will pass. If it can't, if one of those constraints binds, then there will be an RC failure. There is a surcharge associated with that and potential loss of diversity benefits in the real time. So that is the fundamental structure of the RSE. And in order to be prepared to pass that, we go to the next slide. There are four main areas that this initiative has been focused on around the RSE. The first is supplementing the 9 a.m. and in fact throughout the morning advisory RSE results to make sure they're as meaningful as possible and provide the best possible information to CAISO BA operators. We'll talk more about the advisory RSE coming up. The second item is to develop processes and methodologies around accounting for reliability demand response resources and strategic reserve resources in the day-ahead RSE. The third item is process in situations where there is an expected RSE shortfall. And then finally, this initiative took up the question of additional incentives for tagging day-ahead imports. So this is the structure where we're going to go from here, looking at each of these items in greater detail. Before we get into the first one around the RSE and around the advisory RSE results, I'll pause. Are there any questions about the structure of the RSE?
I'm not seeing any questions coming in at this time.
Okay. With that, let's move forward. The first item then that we're going to talk about in detail is the advisory RSE results, what they are, what they do and don't provide to CAISO BA operators, and how the CAISO BA will be complementing those advisory RSE results to provide the most useful picture possible going into the 10 a.m. binding RSE run. Next slide. The advisory RSE is a series of non-binding runs of the RSE optimization that happen throughout the morning leading up to the final binding run at 10. So if you look at the timeline on our slide here, it starts at 6 a.m. and the advisory RSE is going to be run periodically then throughout the morning. Each of those runs is going to provide, it runs the same way as the binding run with all of the information available at that point in time, both on the obligation and the eligible supply side. And so these advisory runs can start providing a picture to CAISO BA operators throughout the morning of how the supply picture is looking going towards the 10 a.m. Closing point. And we can talk a little bit more about what is included in each of those, particularly as we move towards the 9 a.m. run. The 9 a.m. run is going to be significant for a few reasons. But first of all, that is the time when the RSE obligation is going to be finalized, because at 9 a.m., the demand forecast, which as we talked about is a big component of the RSE obligation, the imbalanced reserve requirements and the ancillary services requirements will all be finalized, as well as the VER forecast, the variable energy resource forecasts. And so at 9 a.m., all of the components that determine the RSE obligation, which is that first bullet there, not the VER forecast, that's on the supply side. The obligation will be finalized at 10. Or sorry, I'm sorry, the obligation will be finalized at 9. We will also have in that 9 a.m. advisory RSE run the final VER forecasts and any supply that has been offered into the market by 9 a.m. The 9 a.m. run is also significant because potential shortfalls identified at 9 still leave time if there is an indicative reliability risk to the day-ahead time frame. At that point, there's still time for operators to take action if necessary. So the 9 a.m. advisory RSE run is going to be the most significant one. But if we look at our timeline there, of course, there are a few important things that don't happen until the market closes at 10 a.m. And the biggest piece of that is most resources are still going to be, resources will still be offering into the market between 9 and 10. For resource adequacy resources, the must offer deadline and the bid insertion execution doesn't happen until 10 a.m. And of course, for non-RA resources as well, the market is open until 10. And so if we look at that last bullet on the left-hand side of the slide, the biggest thing that will not be included in the 9 a.m. advisory RSE results is any supply that is offered into the market between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. And the significance of this depends partially on how much capacity are we talking about. You can go to the next slide. So one of the questions that this initiative took on is how big a slice of the RA fleet and the available fleet at 10 a.m. is already going to be offered by 9 a.m. And if we look at the next slide, we did some analysis from summer 2023 and found that on average, about a quarter of the RA fleet was being offered into the market between 9 and 10 a.m., which is a significant portion of the capacity that would ultimately be available to be included in the binding RSE run at 10 would not be showing up in the 9 a.m. advisory results. We have also done some subsequent analysis looking at summer 2024. You can find that in the draft final proposal. And that shows that a similar pattern occurs in July 2024. We're seeing on average about 71% of the capacity bidding in by 9 a.m., although it does vary significantly day to day between about 50 and 90%. So what that tells us is there is a significant portion of the capacity that will be available at 10 a.m. in the final binding RSE run that will not show up in the 9 a.m. advisory results. And because of that, the 9 a.m. advisory results by themselves will often show a shortfall of capacity because that capacity will not be reflected yet. So this initiative took on partly developing a process to help supplement those 9 a.m. advisory results to make sure they provide as accurate a picture as possible for operators of what is likely to happen at 10 a.m. So that's what we're going to talk about next, the process by which we will supplement those results. Next slide. This is going to be a two-part process. The first piece is the CAISO encourages resource scheduling coordinators to submit all day-ahead offers by 9 a.m. if possible for all resources, and especially on high-risk, high-load days, because the more actual offers are in the market before 9 a.m. and reflected in those advisory results, the more accurate and complete the 9 a.m. advisory results will be, and the less estimation and supplementation will be needed. So just as a starting point, we encourage scheduling coordinators to bid as early as possible by 9 a.m. if they can. And of course, those offers will be able to be modified until the market closes at 10. The second piece of this will be the supplementation. And so throughout the morning, because as we discussed earlier, the advisory runs start at 6 a.m. Throughout the morning, CAISO BA operators will be looking at and using a variety of existing tools and processes to determine the likelihood of a shortfall at 10 a.m. So we've listed a few of them here, and we can go through these one by one. These might include the day-ahead market results from the previous day. These could be particularly useful for looking at the recent market behavior of use-limited resources and of RE resources not subject to bid insertion rules, to look at what they have been doing in the market recently. We have the readiness alert process, which provides a forward-looking estimate of available resources. And we have CAISO BA operator offline tools for estimating RA that has not been offered into the market yet based on what has been shown to the CAISO on RA supply plans. So together, CAISO BA operators will be looking at all of the available information streams and existing tools and processes to supplement the 9 a.m. advisory results, the actual market offers, with all the information available about what is likely to be offered into the market by 10 a.m. With that, I'll take a pause. Does anyone have thoughts or questions?
I'm not currently seeing any questions at this time.
All right. Just give it a beat here. All right. Then we can move on to our next section, which will be accounting for reliability demand response resources. Next slide. So reliability demand response resources, are RDRR resources, RDRRs, excuse me, are RA resources that are managed by the California Public Utilities Commission jurisdictional investor-owned utilities. They are supply-side resources that are required to submit real-time offers into the market under specific conditions, those being a CAISO-declared transmission emergency, an emergency alert watch, or other EEA notice. And their resources are intended for emergency use to ensure reliable operations. There are going to be two methods by which RDRs can kind of interact with the RSE. The first one is our last bullet there, which is voluntary day-ahead offers. RDRRs are not required to, but may voluntarily submit offers into the day-ahead market. And where that is the case, then that capacity will be accounted for in the RSE in the same manner as all other offers into the day-ahead market. It'll be included through that method. But because these resources are not required to bid into the day-ahead market, we needed another process for the case in which they don't. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is how RDR capacity that is not offered into the day-ahead market will be incorporated. First, there are going to be two conditions for accounting for including unoffered RDR in the day-ahead resource efficiency evaluation. The first one is going to be if at 9 a.m. CAISO OBA operators are expecting an upward RSE shortfall. And so those three bullets there based on the 9 a.m. advisory results, net of expected RA and adjusted for expected high priority export volumes if needed. So expecting an upward shortfall. And the second condition will be CAISO BA operators are expecting EEA conditions in real time, which is to say they are expecting the conditions that trigger RDR resources to offer into the real-time market to be met in real time. If both of those conditions are met, then CAISO BA operators can incorporate the amount of unoffered RDR capacity into the RSE in the appropriate hours based on the availability of those resources combined with the hours in which we're seeing shortfall or expected shortfall. And so the exact amount of RDR capacity included in the RSE up to the available amount and the hours in which it's incorporated will be at the discretion of the CAISO BA operators. But it will be included on days when both of those conditions are met, expecting a shortfall and expecting EA conditions in real time. Once RDR resources have been included in the RSE, then it is important to make sure that the day-ahead market, that the CAISO BA is not then clearing resources in the RUC process, the residual unit commitment process, that avoid calling those resources in real time, since RDR has now been used to help pass the EDAM RSE. And so hence the second piece here. On days when unoffered RDRR has been included in the RSE, then CAISO BA operators will reduce the RUC procurement target by the same amount of capacity. Similarly, analysis has shown that day-ahead market results do not pose this kind of, they do not create an opportunity for this. And so the CAISO BA is not proposing to modify load bidding rules in the integrated forward market at this time, but the RUC adjustment will be done. I'll pause there.
Not currently seeing any questions at this time. Oh, we just got a question from, we actually just got a question from Alan.
Hi, Alan Meck, PG&E. I just want some clarification on your bullet point where you say you would adjust for, or you would, so how much RDRR would you be counting? Would it be CAISO's estimate of the amount of RDRR that will actually show up, or would it be the capacity value that RDRR is credited?
You're looking at the first then statement there. How much will be included in the RSE?
Yeah.
What that's designed to convey is that, or was someone gonna, did I hear a?
Hillary, it's Michael. I apologize to jump in, but I thought I could answer this, and for PG&E and Edison and folks that have RDRR, we would use the amount of RDR used is the numbers that are provided the day before in your, well, it's manual, in your spreadsheet estimates. So it's not the real-time bid-in amount for today. It's what you are showing to us for tomorrow.
Okay, and are those estimates based on our demand forecast? I believe they are.
I'm actually going to defer that to you. Those numbers.
Okay, fair. I should probably know that, shouldn't I? I believe. Okay.
Yeah, but it's important. It's a good question because it's important to know how we're using numbers for tomorrow for RDR. We are using your numbers.
Yeah. Okay. I know how that is done for SDG&E. I'm not sure about PG&E yet. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's helpful.
I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. Back to you, Hillary.
All right. Thank you for that question, Alan. We will then move on to the two additional kinds of demand response that were addressed in the draft final proposal.
Hillary, we had one additional question before we move on.
Please, who do we have? Michelle.
Yeah, we have a question from Michelle.
Hey, this is Michelle from the CPUC. This is slightly unrelated, but I just want to get some clarity on it. So this is about not only the CPUC's RSE, but other EDAM entities' RSEs and potential double counting. So I was thinking about this, and I'm trying to figure out, it's my understanding that CAISO approves e-tags when they're received. Is that correct? Because there's an obligation for you guys to act on e-tags soon. Is that right?
Danny, could you speak to that?
Yeah, Michelle, the CAISO's practice is to approve e-tags once submitted.
Okay. So imagine that another BAA submits an e-tag and an export, low priority export e-tag out of the CAISO system. And all you need is approved e-tags to include in a BAA's RSE. So does an external BAA, can they use a low priority export e-tag in their RSE?
So the EDAM policy allows for firm energy contracts. That could be WSPP Schedule Cs, potentially that are repackaging an LPT to count. So yes, this possibility does exist for all BAAs. There's no source specificity required prior to running the EDAM RSE.
Well, Danny, this is Heather. I want to make sure we're all clear that the EDAM RSE does not include. It's not a transmission optimization. So Michelle, I just want to be clear. I think there's a slight error in the predicate there. The EDAM RSE for other balancing authority areas looks at their supply bids. The e-tags are not part of the RSE.
That's correct,
I don't think that's correct. are you, so
Yes,
we
it is
don't,
correct. E-tags are not part of they're not part of the RSE. The RSE is looking at other information, but not E-tags.
What you may be thinking of, Michelle, is the real-time tagging validation prior to running the stuck from the relevant hour. That would be the linkage with tagging coming out of the day ahead.
okay, so the KISO BAA uses imports to meet its Schedule C imports, right? To meet its RA obligations. And
well, let's not cross RA obligations with the RSE. So the RSE, separate optimization running, imports into the balancing authority area, you know, where there's appropriate bids, et cetera, you know, are eligible for counting if they're from an RSE eligible registered resource. But Danny, I don't know if you wanted to clarify, but I just want to be sure we're not, you know, we have the transmission set of rules that KISO operates under. We have an RA set of rules, and then the RSE, and those are all kind of separate.
I guess I'm trying to get at what you need to meet your each balancing authority, what they need to meet their RSE obligations. So for the KISO balancing authority, we need those import bids, and we need the bids within the balancing authority. What do other BAAs need if they're using low priority exports, which they're allowed to do in the EIM space, right? Use those low priority exports.
What they would be using, Michelle.
What?
But I already cut you off. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh,
what
no,
they would be
okay.
using is a firm energy contract through an existing market participant. In the EDAM RSE timeframe and in the EDAM, there will be no tag validation or source specificity required for that supply.
Right,
Okay.
and
And
so
this
the
was
way we
part of the
take
EDAM design.
right, and so the way that's effectuated is RSE eligible resources in the other balancing authority areas are registered and qualified for the RSE. All resources in the KISO balancing area are registered as eligible. So I think it's that RSE eligibility flag for the resource that maybe, Michelle, you're centering on. And that's, go ahead.
Okay. So could, okay, let's say an external BAA signs a contract with a marketer for a WSC, signs a WSCC contract, but that marketer is going to buy low priority exports out of the KISO system. Is that possible for that to count as in part of their RSE?
I believe what they'd have to do to get it to count for the RSE, though, is it has to be reflected in the EDAM transfers. And when it's reflected in the EDAM transfers, the way it's, quote, counted in the RSE, though if other RSE experts are on the line, they should jump in. But I believe the way the counting works, Michelle, is it's not that the other balancing authority has, say, 100 obligation and we counted 100. It switches. So their obligation, for example, could be reduced to 80, and then the exporting balancing authority would be increased to 120. That's how the counting works, but it's effectuated through the EDAM transfers, and there's some implementation that has to be followed for that to count.
But I'm confused because when somebody has a WSCC contract, they don't necessarily know the source balancing authority. So say, I don't know, I don't want to pick on anyone, so I don't want to pick any external balancing authority. Let's say they sign a contract with a marketer, and it's a firm supply contract, but we have no idea where that's coming from. But what if they intend to source it out of the KISO BAA as a low priority export?
So I can offer that you're both right, which is, I think, good news. The happy path is what Heather identified, where the source and the sync BAAs would identify that prior to running the market, and it would be reflected, and it would be reflected in the EDAM transfers between the BAA, and it's essentially an offset for counting purposes in the EDAM RSE. There does exist the possibility as part of the EDAM design, which was intentional, to allow firm energy contracts that are not source specific to count in the EDAM RSE, and then the protection was in the real time to have tag validation to make sure that that was actual physical supply that was shown for the EDAM RSC.
Right, but in the real time, maybe we're addressing this in the real time, but in the real time, we allow low priority exports to be included in a BAA space schedule, even if they haven't cleared the relevant market.
We do allow exports from the CAISO to be included in WEIM BAA space schedules, yes.
For the real time, but again, the EDAM is different.
No, because you guys, since you approve E-tags without clearing the day ahead market, they could have E-tags that show that they can export for the WEIM, unless I'm missing something.
And I think what you're getting at is, Michelle, the CAISO's practice of automatically approving E-tags. This was discussed about this time last year. And while they are automatically approved, the CAISO is really clear through its BPM that we would expect that market participants are adjusting those E-tags to respect market schedules.
So you're saying that you expect them, if they don't clear the day ahead market, to what, untag them? And not include them in the RSC?
To adjust the approved tag amount to what cleared the market, then as you flow into real time, if there's a lower tagged amount, the EDAM policy would expect that BAA to find supply elsewhere to meet their obligations prior to that about 5-hour time period before the real-time operating hour.
Right. Yeah. We also have our tagging requirements in order to get those to count and stay in the pool. For failure to tag by the, I believe it's the stuck horizon, the EDAM entity would be removed from the pool. But I want to be sure that on this call, we're staying focused on the EDAM RSC to the extent it flows through to real time. We should definitely talk about that. We did have RDRR on the screen, so I just want to make sure, Michelle, we're both answering the question that you have here or having a follow-up if we've talked around the axle a bit too much.
Sorry, I only have like 10 minutes, so I just wanted to bring it up because it seems like a pretty important policy to address. And so what we're talking about is like, oh, we want the CAISO's RSC to be sort of bulletproof. And I'm saying that all the RSCs aren't bulletproof if some of them aren't. So like we're doing all this work here and I'm saying, you know, there's a sort of a big hole here from a reliability perspective. And I think Scott Harvey had identified this as well. And that hole is that all you require is that they're E-tagged, but CAISO approves E-tags. Now I get it that you guys are saying, we think this is really important and we don't want people to do this. And I get that everyone for most of the time is going to do this. The only time they're not going to do this is during a reliability event when they need it and they need to pass the RSC. So it will be, I mean, it's an edge case, but it's already happened. So I think it's just important for us to think about this as we're spending a lot of time on ensuring that CAISO RSC is bulletproof. So that's all.
Thanks, Michelle, for flagging the concern. And I agree with you that this is the existing design, and this concern was identified in EDAM, and we talked about this quite a bit. I think I remember having a conversation with you, I think about this in a ballroom in Rancho Cordova, of all places.
I know, I just don't want people to forget about it.
Yeah, this was something that is an edge case, and as such, we had planned to monitor it to see if it would be a problem.
And
the EDAM policy was that tagging deadline would be a good place to start to try to discipline this.
Yes, and I will only say that during edge cases, these are precisely the things that happen. You know, it happened once, and I know it hasn't happened again, but we haven't had, you know, extreme conditions across the entire West. So I feel like Scott Harvey, we sort of got to this issue and we have identified it as a reliability issue and a HASP issue, and that we've all agreed that it's problematic and we should probably address it. And it doesn't seem like people are focused on it. So I just wanted to raise it again. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm not seeing any further hands raised at this time.
All right. Well, with that, then we will move on to our final two types of demand response as related to the RSE. So the first is proxy demand resources. And we recognize that there are kind of two subcategories here. Some PDR is shown to the ISO as RA, some is not. And so for PDR that is shown as RA, that capacity has a must offer obligation with the ISO to submit day-ahead supply bids. It will be RSE eligible like other RA resources. For non-RA proxy demand resources, they will be included in the RSE through their bids, through their offers into the day-ahead market. But this is one of those places where we do encourage SCs to bid by 9 a.m. if possible, because, for example, non-RA PDR does not have a must-offer obligation with the ISO. So behavior of that capacity from the ISO's perspective is more complex. So all offers are ultimately included, but the earlier those can be put in and provide visibility through the advisory results, the better. And then load modifying demand response will be reflected as a reduction to the CAISO BA's day-ahead demand forecast when, as per today, it has been communicated to the ISO in the pre-day-ahead timeframe as certain to be curtailed the day of by the load serving entity responsible. That is our final two demand response categories. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time.
Moving on then. Next, we will talk about the Strategic Reliability Reserve resources, and specifically a subset of those, the Electricity Supply Strategic Reliability Reserve Program, or ESSRRP. As with the Greater Strategic Reliability Reserve, the ESSRRP was established in 2022 to support grid reliability during extreme events. It currently consists of two categories, about 2,900 megawatts of long start resources and 193 megawatts of short start resources. These are differentiated, as the name suggests, by their ramp-up time. So the long start resources are all located within the CAISO balancing authority area, and they are committed multiple days in advance if they're needed. They have a longer ramp time. The short start ESSRP resources are not committed before the day-ahead market. They do not submit day-ahead supply offers. Instead, they submit offers into the real-time market when the CAISO balancing authority declares an EEA watch or more severe EEA condition. And so looking at how those might be incorporated into the RSE, if we move to the next slide. The long start resources will be, they will be monitored by CAISO BA operators and included in the RSE at operator discretion on days when they have been brought online and are meeting operational requirements. The ramp-up time for these resources is long enough that operators will have a chance in the day-ahead time frame to see if those requirements are met. And so they will be included in the RSE at operator discretion on the days when those resources are online and meeting operational requirements. They'll be counted towards the host balancing authority area's RSE supply, which will be the CAISO, since all of those resources are located within the CAISO footprint. By contrast, the short start resources will not be included in the RSE, since they operate entirely within the real-time market time frame and will not be bid in on the day-ahead time frame. I see we have a question from Callie.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Quick question on the long start resources. So it makes sense that if they're online, they're included in the RSE, but can you guys remind me with the changes to that operating procedure, do the long start resources submit bids in the day ahead, or do they only submit bids in real time, but they're ED'd in day ahead?
Thank you, Callie. That's a great point. So this does reflect those recent changes that were made to Operating Procedure 4420. And so these are in line with that. They are not required to bid into day-ahead market, and so we have not tagged their RSE inclusion to that. It is operator discretion if they're online and meeting the requirements. Would anyone else like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's Michael. So, yeah, 4420 does a good job in this. The final proposal also discusses as well. It's the combination of bids and the operational stability. In this sense, getting the resource online first try sometimes doesn't always work. So once it's online, then those bids get accounted, in the RSE and day ahead as ED. Again, it's the combination of both.
Okay, so I think that makes sense, but if they don't have, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how much will be included in the RSE once they're online if they don't have bids in the day ahead market. Is the megawatt amount included in the RSE just to their ED level at that point?
The current practice of EDing is we ED at PMIN for these. And so I'm in thinking about this, and I'll have to make sure this is correct with policy going forward. I would think that we would continue to do it that way.
Okay, yeah, so I get that they get ED to PMIN, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out is for RSE purposes, is the megawatt that's included in the RSE supply only the PMIN amount, assuming it's ED at PMIN, or is it the full capacity of that resource?
Okay. Well,
recognizing that they don't have bids in the day ahead.
Yeah, so if it would be for their full capacity, bearing in mind, intertemporal constraints, how fast they can actually, move up their resource coming in up to peak.
Okay, even though they don't have bids in the day ahead.
Well, they would have bids once they're operationally stable.
They have bids in the day ahead? Oh, sorry, I thought that they don't have bids in the day ahead, just real time. So if they have bids in the day ahead, that makes complete sense. I'm just trying to figure out if they don't have bids in the day ahead, but they're ED to PMIN, what megawatt amount will be included in the RSE supply?
So current practice is once we ED them and we get them stable, we request them to bid and it's current practice in our BPM also, that we request bidding at that time. I would suppose we continue that process.
Okay, I guess we can take this offline. My understanding was slightly different, but I might be missing something there. I didn't think that they had bids in the day ahead, but yeah, we can take this offline. Thanks.
All right. Seeing any other hands raised at this moment?
Thank you, Christine. And Kelly? All right. Moving on to the next section then. So now we will talk about situations where, on the basis of both the advisory RSE results at 9 a.m., as well as all these other information sources that we talked about earlier, CAISO BA operators are expecting a shortfall. If we move to the next slide. So an expected upward shortfall may be indicative of a reliability risk in the day-ahead time frame. And so in these situations, at EDAM launch, the CAISO BA is going to be using existing exceptional dispatch authority to address any day-ahead reliability issues that are identified through a potential RSE shortfall. So this is going to be the RSE estimated outcomes are going to be sort of one input into the CAISO BA operator's decision-making around use of exceptional dispatch in the pre-day ahead market timeframe. CAISO BA will not be, is not expecting to attempt any kind of action around downward RSC shortfalls at this time, but we'll be focused on scenarios where there's an expected upward shortfall. Any questions there?
Not seeing any hands raised.
Moving on then. This brings us then to the final topic of the day, which is the potential new incentives for tagging day-ahead imports. Next slide. So we'll do a little background, a quick review on the status quo. So WEIM RSC, the RSC pool and tagging requirements. EDMBAs that pass the day-ahead RSC will be grouped together and evaluated as a pool in the real-time RSC. And to remain in that pool and receive those diversity benefits, non-source specific imports that an EDMBA relied on to pass the RSC must meet tagging requirements to provide confidence supply will ultimately be available to serve load. So scheduling coordinators have up until 5 hours before the start of the operating hour to submit e-tags or resupply, and this ability to resupply acts as a backstop on untagged imports. EDMBAs that fail to meet these tagging requirements and don't resupply will be removed from the EIM pool and lose those potential diversity benefits. And so one of the things that was identified in this initiative early on is the question of whether or not there should be additional incentives for tagging day-ahead imports. And based on both the degree of stakeholder concern when this was introduced in the issue paper, and also looking at past empirical analysis that shows the high reliability of economy and energy ports that receive day-ahead market schedules, the determination has been not to create new incentives at this time. So we move to the next slide. For the time being, the CAISO BA is going to move forward at EDM launch with the current tagging rules, not develop any additional incentives at this time, but this is something, and Danny alluded to this earlier, that the CAISO BA will be monitoring this e-tagging compliance at EDM Go Live to see if additional incentives are needed in the future. Any questions there?
Not seeing any hands raised at this moment.
Give it one more minute here. All right. Well, that is the final of our items today. So this covers all of the items in scope for this initiative. Excuse me. And with that, next slide.
We did just get a hand raised by Alan.
Alan, thank you.
Hi, Alan Meck, PG&E again. I had some conversations with CAISO staff offline about this, and I was hoping we could get this cleared up, partially because it was so long ago that I'm having a little bit of trouble remembering. So it was my understanding that this was not exactly the final word on how the tagging requirement will work. And so let's propose a scenario where, let's say we've got 30,000 megawatts worth of RSC obligation. We have 35,000 megawatts worth of supply bid in, and 5 megawatts of that is a non-source specific RSE that fails to tag. What happens in that scenario? Because it seems absurd to me that we would get kicked out of the WEIM RSC because of that 5 megawatts.
I think that is where that resupply opportunity would come in. But Danny, do you have any other thoughts on that, or anyone else?
That's exactly right. So there's a 5 megawatt gap. So any supply that wasn't scheduled in the day ahead that's participating in real time and any incremental supply participating in the CAISO BAA or at its boundaries would be able to count towards that resupply.
So that extra 5,000 megawatt cushion that we've got above the RSE obligation, would that be eligible to resupply that 5 megawatts?
No, this would be supply not scheduled in the day ahead.
Okay. That sounds a little bit concerning, because don't we bid in all of our supply in the day ahead, or at least we try to? So what additional supply is there?
Yeah. Anything that doesn't get scheduled in the day ahead. This is another one of those edge cases. I mean, the premise would be all of CAISO's supply gets scheduled and then there's nothing left. Is that the concern that you're raising, Owen?
Yeah, which seems likely in the event of a large heat wave, right? We're going to schedule in everything that gets bid in.
Yeah, the scenario that you're highlighting is possible then.
Right, and I just want to level set that the reason, the parties at the, at the initial stage of EDAM decided not to put a de minimis exception here to really enforce the importance of tagging and rely on, the contracting parties to also enforce the importance of tagging. So if your question, though, Alan, was, would a de minimis exception be considered in the future if facts arise to support it? I see no reason why that is off the table, both in CAISO and, broadly of the EDAM participants. Danny, did you have thoughts on that?
Nope, that makes sense to me. And it's said better than I would say it.
Well, I don't want to present this as only a de minimis concern. If I change the hypothetical a little bit, let's say that you've got 5,000 megawatts worth of non-source specific imports. And I know this would be kind of absurd, but assume all 5,000 megawatts of that non-source specific imports failed to tag.
You're out of the pool. Right.
It's my opinion, we should still be in the pool.
Well, right, but that's kind of the policy came out that if folks don't tag, and this is for California and others, but if folks don't tag, you're out of the pool, but you have a resupply option. So, maybe that 5 megawatts is easier to cover than 5,000 in a resupply. But I think this is one of the things that we're open to looking at facts on the ground. We do believe in the importance of tagging. That's a partnership all around. But I don't know if there's more to say about that here, Alan. I think that's why we wanted to explore incentives for tagging. But I don't know if we had anything on the table that came to us, and we did rack our brains, and I don't think we came up with any incentives, but I don't think that conversation is fully closed.
Okay, that's good to hear. And let me just say, for putting my cards on the table, I don't think that we disagree with the idea that we should have some incentives for tagging. Our heartburn comes at the level at which we're putting those incentives into the RSE, because then you're changing the RSE into a resource sufficiency evaluation plus a tagging requirement. It's changing the nature of what we're trying to do here, and in my opinion, inappropriately. If someone has a non-source specific bid into the CAISO market and they fail to tag on that, then to me, from an economic standpoint, it would be most appropriate to visit the punishment on that tag, on that resource that failed to, or on that scheduling coordinator or balancing authority that failed to deliver the physical power. But putting it into the RSE is weird, and I think it messes things up.
And Alan, as Heather offered, we're not foreclosing that path. Kind of figuring out a good cost causation-based incentive to a party who doesn't tag isn't inappropriate, but it's also not not a small proceeding, right? Because you're going to have to then rerun counterfactuals of with the CAISO in the pool to figure out what the potential cost impacts are of the CAISO being excluded. sizable effort, which is why, at least with Go Live, we want to see if it's even worth going down that path.
Well, the reason that I would like to try and address that sooner rather than later is because if we wait until it matters, the problem is it's reliability. It's not going to matter until it really, really matters. You know, if we come down the road and we sort of let this ticking time bomb sit in the market, you know, 99.99% of the time it doesn't matter, and then all of a sudden we come to an edge case and we have a couple of resources fail to submit an e-tag, and you know, even though we still managed to pass our RSE, or at least we should because we've got enough extra supply, but all that supply gets scheduled because let's say that we're in a west-wide heat wave, and now CAISO gets kicked out of the WEIM RSE pool because a couple of e-tags failed to get submitted by the non-source specific RSE, or the non-source specific resources, and then we end up failing the WEIM RSE, and then we get kicked out of, and then we get our transfers capped in WEIM, and then we're in a reliability scenario. And
well, I think it's important, Alan, though, to also remember that the role of the contracting parties have in this scenario too. So we can again, if there are incentives for tagging, I think we're open to them. I don't know if anyone brought them to the table, but contracting parties who are contracting under those arrangements, you know, have the power to, you know, impose various consequences for failing to tag, because I think it's also important to think about when our tagging timeline is. It was designed, you know, to give folks as much time as possible. But so I just think it's important in that chain of potential events to remember the role of all partners in enforcing the tagging.
well, if that's your position, then we should have no tagging requirement in the EDAM RSC, because what I'm hearing you say is that, well, the individual contracting parties would enforce that.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a policy that's already in the approved tariff on the tagging. So I think here the question is what incentives can we come up with to keep the CAISO in the pool? And I think that discussion could remain open, but to date we hadn't had any brought to the table.
Okay, well, two things. From what I remember, and EDAM policy development was a very long time ago. My brain's getting older, but I recall that we vaguely had this discussion at some point, and then we kind of just agreed to table it. I don't think that we ever came down on a final decision on, and I certainly don't think that we have ever had any sort of in-depth discussion on the tagging requirements during EDAM policy development. So I would push back a little bit on the idea that, like, oh, this was discussed and it's like in the final tariff and everything like this. To the extent that anything is in the final tariff, I think that was done just sort of on CAISO's own without any real policy discussion, from what I remember. That, again, could be wrong. It was a while ago.
What? Yeah, it was. I think what you're highlighting, Alan, is that we decided to table it if incentives would be needed for the CAISO BAA, and that's still where we are with this.
Okay.
By Go Live, it is. I can't understate enough how complicated it gets when you start having to run counterfactual market results with different groupings to try to get cost projections to assign to non-tagging parties. And not that that isn't something that we can pursue and that the CAISO BA would be opposed to it. It's just by Go Live, that's not the highest priority thing that we've identified for participation. There could be a problem. We don't know if there's a problem. So the proposal is still to see if there's a there, and then see if we can either sweep this off the table into the trash or if we need to actually address it.
Okay. Maybe, how about this? Danny, can I reach out to you offline and we can talk about, because I'd like to understand some of the nuance that you're bringing up about how this kind of is can of worms and it gets really complicated quickly. Because I'm not seeing
Absolutely.
that. But, yeah, it's not to say that you're wrong or anything. I just I'd like to understand that more.
Sure.
All right. Thank you.
Hillary and I are happy to talk about DAS.
Next up, we have a hand raised by Callie.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF again. If you guys don't mind, I kind of wanted to circle back on my previous question about the long start SRR resources. I pulled up the operating procedure and it only references that they submit bids into the real-time market. So I guess my first question is anyways, do these long start SRR resources ever submit bids into the day ahead market?
I can speak to that. And Heather, if you have anything to add, please. But I think what we have on this slide here is designed to reflect the fact that, right, per the most recent updates to 4420, they may but are not required. So that is not something that we wanted to tie the entirety of the connection between the long starts and RSE inclusion to, because there may be days where they end up being online and operational, but we don't have bids to look at. So as a starting point, our consideration of the long starts is meant to be flexible in that way.
Right, Hillary, I think that's correct. Operating procedure 4420 doesn't prevent the resources from submitting bids into the day ahead market where they're able to do so, where the operational constraints of the resource enable the day ahead market to optimize them. And since the RSE is tied to bids and self-schedules, where there is a bid in the market associated with the resource, to answer an earlier question, it's counted at full capacity. That's how the RSE works for all resources, not just the strategic reserves. Where there are not bids in the market, additional mechanisms are needed, and that was the one we talked through for RDRR, because where bids are not in the day ahead market, the RSE will not pick them up. And so the strategic reserves that don't have a bid in the market, in the day ahead market, usually for whatever reasons they don't, are not counted towards the RSE in the day ahead time frame. They would be counted in the real time time frame.
Okay, so just to kind of repeat what you just said and make sure I understand it. So long start SRR resources can submit bids into the day ahead market. If they have bids, they'll be counted to PMAX. If they don't have bids but have been ED'd and are online, they'll be counted to PMIN. And then if they're offline entirely, they won't be counted at all.
I mean, nothing prevents them from submitting bids in the day ahead market. There were operational reasons that they couldn't do that in the past summer, where we have another year to learn and then one more year before they're offline. And so yeah, our procedure enables that, but the resources are challenging resources. And so if, again, here we're talking about general applicability where there are no bids in the day ahead market, they are not counted.
Okay, but if they're ED'd online to PMIN, when the day ahead RSE runs, they will be counted to PMIN?
If they don't have bids in the market, they will not be counted. If they are ED'd and have a dispatch in real time, that unfortunately is not a bid in the day ahead market. The CAISO uses the minimum operating constraint to enable that functionality. And the day ahead RSE does not pick up the minimum operating constraint. It picks up bids and self-schedules. So if the resource is either self-schedule or bid at all in the day ahead market, then they will be picked up for the RSE for those hours.
Okay, interesting. I'll have to think about that because I thought I heard something differently earlier when they were online at PMIN. But I appreciate you clarifying that they can submit bids into the day ahead market. Thanks.
Well, and I think earlier in the discussion, it could have been talked about as a multi-day event. And I think we don't know how that would look. So that's what I heard in the prior discussion. Say we have 4 or 5 days in a row that the resources are on. So I think we maybe would need to look at the fact pattern. But Danny, Michael, Bobcat, did I get anything wrong in that description?
That was accurate to me, Bobcat. I think the other thing to consider is that the SCs really are in the position to determine whether they submit bids or not. And, so that's, I think some of the decision making would go into the policy that's set by the state as well.
Okay, thank you for letting me to circle back on that. And yeah, if on the multi-day event, if you guys can add that clarification, how that would be treated in terms of the RSE purposes, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. Any additional?
Seeing any other? No, not seeing any other questions at this time.
All right. We can move on to the next slide then, wrapping up here. So this concludes our presentation today, and we ask that we're going to take comments on this conversation and the draft final proposal. The draft final proposal is of course available on the initiative website, and we're asking for those by February 4th. And with that, Christina, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Hillary. And yeah, that comment template will open up later today for folks to start making comments. And I just have a quick announcement before we wrap up today. For insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe to get updates. Here you can see some of our latest blog posts. And with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage. We thank you so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.